A very good morning to all of you. Mr. Vanwari, and Mr. Vanwari, and friends. Well, it's indeed a pleasure and a privilege to be amidst you. And I wish to very, very sincerely thank IndiaTelevision.com for giving me this opportunity to speak to you in this forum. Hopefully, this forum will candidly discuss and analyze the many achievements and landmarks that the news television has accomplished in last 2 decades or so, and also the opportunities, challenges, and responsibilities that it needs to consider to make the growth of new channels sustainable and perhaps purposeful. The vital issue to my mind is, following the first phase of digitization, is the stage set for a paradigm shift in technology, business models, and of course content. And what each one of us needs to do to maximize the gains of digitization within the larger context of consumer and national interest. In November 2011, when the Parliament of India passed the amendment in the Cable Act to make addressable digitization of analog cable services mandatory by December 2014 in 4 phases, and the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting issued the notification, the decision of the government was welcomed, was animatedly discussed, and while everyone felt that it was the right thing to do, there were serious apprehensions and doubts about government's ability and industry's preparedness to carry out the mandate. And the reasons for this apprehension were many and actually real. The global experience in this regard suggested that the process could be long drawn and protracted. Indeed, the task, given the time limits, was complex and colossal, and the enormity almost mind-boggling. Close to 10 million set-top boxes to be installed in households in the first phase without a single paisa of subsidy to the consumer or to anybody else. The entire cost of STB to be borne by the consumer, a large part of them belonging to poor and very poor segments of society, and huge investments required to be made in procuring digital head-ends and set-top boxes, and as significantly, the possible resistance from the entrenched vested interests. The fears and doubts were genuine and justified because the task was indeed extremely difficult and daunting. However, we can claim with satisfaction and certain amount of pride that the phase 1 has been successfully implemented. Delhi and Mumbai are digitized both de jure and de facto. Kolkata has been digitized de jure and almost 100% de facto, while Chennai awaits a decision of the court to complete the process. I must, for this extraordinary and astounding feat, congratulate, felicitate, and thank all the stakeholders, TRI, and also my colleagues in the ministry. While the important task of placing set-top boxes in consumer houses is done, we are working on the challenge of bringing addressability in the entire system. Unless there is addressability, that is, encryption of the digital signals, the objective of digitization cannot be achieved fully. While a number of steps are being taken by TRI and the ministry to accelerate full addressability and full transparency, we must acknowledge that it is work in progress, and like any other massive exercise, needs some time for stabilization. We are sure that the benefits of digitization in terms of credible and correct subscription data, transparency in the generation and sharing of revenues, and increased choices to the consumer will start flowing in full measure in near future. In phase 2 cities, which are 38 across 15 states, you may be aware that we have achieved more than 65% digitization on an average. 4 cities have achieved more than 100% digitization, while 7 cities are almost there, having achieved more than 90% digitization. Out of 38 cities, 28 are above 50% mark. There is availability, adequate availability of set-top boxes. We are constantly reviewing the progress. A daily monitoring system is in place, and by all accounts, we feel quite certain that the target for phase 2 would be achieved. While Ministry is doing its best to achieve the target, there are certain responsibilities cast on various stakeholders in the industry. Broadcasters have been mandated by the regulator to expeditiously sign the content agreements with MSOs so that contractual agreements are in place well before DAS is rolled out. Broadcasters also need to realize that Ministry has been permitting several independent MSOs to operate in phase 2 cities. They need to be supported with speedy agreements and sharing of content so that the seeding of boxes could be accelerated. Similarly, MSOs should take proactive role in procurement of set-top boxes. MSOs also need to ensure that standardized boxes, as per regulations, are provided to the consumer at an affordable price. For phase 2 cities, therefore, MSOs must declare an affordable rate, taking into consideration that people from lower income group will find it difficult to afford set-top boxes if they are priced beyond their reach. State governments also have to play an extremely important role in bringing the stakeholders together and ensure that an interface is established between various stakeholders so that the process of switchover is smooth. They also have to play an extremely important role in stopping the piracy of signal. I urge upon the cable operators to make use of digitization opportunity to expand their business, as they are the most important link between the consumer and the service providers. I need not go into the details of the dividend that digitization would bring to the industry. It is now well recognized and well accepted that digitization, perhaps the single most important initiative in the recent time, which can bring about much needed reform in the sector. The dividends, of course, will take a little time to get manifested, but the signs are there. There are unmistakable signs. They are impacting the nature of programming, the content, and the emerging flexibility in offering choices to the consumers, something which is very essential in the context of such a diversified market as India. The data released by TAM post-digitization reveals and provides some wide contours of the impending changes. Some patterns are emerging. Sampling is increasing, differentiation is becoming critical, and the long tail of content is creating new business opportunities as the place and time of consumption of content can be shifted at will. The content industry is also due for restructuring. 70% of the content in India is commissioned with content creators not enjoying the intellectual property rights. This has to change if the content is to be made an exportable commodity, an opportunity that is rife with promise given our diaspora globally. It may be relevant to mention here that another game changer for the broadcasting industry in India is about to roll out. Following clearance by empowered group of ministers, the ministry is all set to launch the process of auctioning 839 new private FM radio stations in 295 cities of India, to be conducted through a transparent, ascending e-auction process. This major policy paradigm will ensure that all towns having a population of 1 lakh or more are serviced by FM radio service. An equally significant segment for people's empowerment is the community radio. While more than 150 community radios are functional today, the ministry, through some new policy initiatives, expect this number to reach at least 500 in the current 5-year plan period. The debate on the current discourse on the news channels is becoming more and more intense. I suppose that is one issue which perhaps would find a lot of attention during the discussions that will ensue. Following the proliferation of new channels in India in the last 2 decades, some believe that perhaps we have been far more liberal in granting permissions for channels. We should have been a little more conservative, and perhaps this kind of problem, as Mr. Banwari was referring to, about 400 channels or 800 odd channels vying for the advertising pie, making many of them not sustainable. So, following the proliferation of new channels in India in the last 2 decades, riding over the very liberal permission policy of the government, the content on the new channels has become a matter of debate and dispute, and on occasions of serious concern. India is the only country in the world where there are close to 400 new channels. India is also the only country in the world that does not have a regulator. Government in the recent years have actively encouraged self-regulation in both news broadcasting and entertainment broadcasting. The self-regulatory regime set up by the respective sectors are in place for quite some time now, and it is high time and highly desirable, rather imperative, that industry does an honest introspection and analysis about the efficiency, efficacy, and effectiveness of self-regulation. The societal perception about self-regulation is a mixed bag. And while there have been opinions supporting the self-regulatory regime, there are also very strong voices questioning the very concept. It will be important for the industry to take such steps that make self-regulation effective and timely. It will perhaps be interesting to find out what is happening on this issue elsewhere in the world. Many of you would be aware that in UK, following the phone hacking scandal, the British Prime Minister had set up a one-man commission under Lord Levison to report on the ethics and functioning of media in UK. Exactly a week ago, on 18th of March, a cross-party deal was reached on a new press regulation, which, while defending the principle of a free press, prevents a repeat of phone hacking scandal that shook Great Britain last year. To be put in place through a royal charter, the independent regulator will have powers to impose fines and demand prominent corrections, and courts will be allowed to impose exemplary damages on newspapers that fail to join the body. Under the new dispensation, the newspaper industry has lost its power to veto appointments to the body that will replace the Press Complaints Commission, the previous regulator discredited by its failure to investigate phone hacking by leading newspapers. If newspapers refuse to cooperate with the regulator or set up a body that is not accepted by new recognition panel, they will be more liable to exemplary damages in the event that they recklessly publish inaccurate stories. It is significant to note that the agreement of all the 3 major political parties of Great Britain was considerably influenced by a public campaign by the victims of phone hacking. Brian Cathcart, a professor of journalism and one of the founders of the Hacked Off campaign, said that the new system will protect the freedom of the press at the same time, will also protect the public from the kinds of abuses that made the Levison inquiry necessary. Predictably, the press, or at least a sizable section of press in the UK, has furiously opposed these regulations. In India, the government does not intend any regulation and shall not in any way curb, curtail, or dilute the freedom of expression enshrined in the Constitution. But we also sincerely wish that the correction and moderation in public discourse is brought about by the media itself, sooner than later, keeping in mind the larger public and national interest. We earnestly hope that a situation is not created where intervention of any kind becomes inevitable. Let me conclude by leaving a thought with you: the need to seriously and urgently consider policy innovations and industry initiatives to make India the digital global hub, not only for teleports and other hardware, but also more significantly in terms of content creation and content production. I deem it as the most exciting and compelling challenges that we should collectively take up as we ride on the wave of digitization. As Brutus said in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, there's a tide in the affairs of men which, taken on the flood, leads on to fortune. There's a tide in the affairs of men which, taken on the flood, leads on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyages of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea are we now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves or lose our ventures. A recent report released by KPMG and FICCI Frames in Mumbai 10 days ago claims that the Indian media and entertainment industry grew from Indian rupees 728 billion in 2011 to Indian rupees 821 billion in 2012, registering an overall growth of 12.6%. They also contrasted it with the growth in GDP, which is near about 5% in the same period. The report further predicts that given the impetus introduced by digitization, continued growth of regional media, strength in the film sector, and fast increasing new media businesses, the industry is estimated to achieve a growth rate of 11.8%, to grow at a healthy CAGR of 15.2%, to reach Indian rupees 1,661 billion by 2017. A very heartening prospect. My conviction, however, is that the actual progress will exceed these projections. Digitization is the most momentous change that television in India is witnessing ever since cable was introduced in 1991 in a big way. The second largest television market in the world is surely and inevitably hurtling towards complete digitization by 2014. This means 153 million TV homes and more due to become digital and addressable. This is changing everything about this 40,000 crore TV industry, the programming, the content, the business models, but above all, transparency and an unprecedented quality and choice to the consumer. The future progress and pace of digitization will essentially pivot upon the last two factors more than anything else: the transparency in the system and the hearty endorsement of the consumer. Let us brace ourselves for these challenges. कुछ कफस की तीलियों से छन रहा है नूर सा, कुछ कफस की तीलियों से छन रहा है नूर सा, कुछ फिजा कुछ हसरतें परवाज की बातें करें. Thank you very much.
So 1 second, sir. A couple of questions from the audience. Anyone out there, you don't get a chance like this very often. Questions to the Honorable Secretary? Yeah, can you pass the mic to them? Thank you very much, sir, for the wonderful address. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, I wanted to ask you, like you said that the cable operators will be benefited with the digitization, and since they're the link between the people and the server. But how will they be benefited? I mean, that will be basically the stoppage of their business, because they won't be able to persuade people and buying their dish. Instead, the government will be benefited because they are allowing the digitization. They are bringing up their own set-top boxes.
Yep.
Well, I think, shall I respond or shall I take other questions and then respond?
Yeah, you can respond, sir.
Okay. No, I think all businesses assume that there will be transparency. If the success in a business is based on the assumption that you make money on the sly, that business model perhaps cannot become sustainable. Now, in the context of cable operators, what is going to happen is that the subscriber base is going to become transparent. It may hurt them in the short run, perhaps, because if they have an undisclosed subscriber base on which they are not paying any revenues to the government, obviously this is of advantage to them. But you will realize that firstly it is not sustainable, secondly it is not lawful. Therefore, we have to really migrate to a transparent system of business. How they are going to gain is the kind of more opportunities that they're going to get. See, the cable, and unlike DTH, is quite capable of offering services of all kinds. The same cable operator can also become internet service provider because the same cable would be taking that service to them. There are so many value-added services that can be added. So I think that is what is to be understood properly.
And also, the cable operator cannot really upgrade the system to deliver the number of channels which are there. That can only come about by digitization. So if that happens, then the value-added services come in. In the medium to long run, they will generate revenue. You know, that's very clear if you follow models across the world. Yeah, next question.
Good afternoon. You were talking about auctioning radio frequencies. How do you ensure transparency in this process? And the second one is that you're talking about self-regulation in the media. Isn't it a utopian idea? I think everybody has to think about TRPs in a business, which is, I mean, media has become business these days. So everybody has to look at TRPs to ensure that the channel runs. And self-regulation is something which is tough to happen when you have to look at TRPs. So how is it going to happen? Is there any middle path?
Okay, let me take the simple one first. Transparency in e-auction process. You have followed 3G auction process, which generated more than 1 lakh crore rupees for the country. We are following exactly the same process. And if that process is not transparent, then no process is transparent. So I think that settles the first question. Second question is a rather complex one. It also depends how do you really view the role of a new channel. Well, there are large number of people who are strongly endorse self-regulation. Their belief is that media is a section apart whose primary responsibility is to really keep people aware and educate people about what is going around. It doesn't matter if something extremely bad or wrong is going around, but that must be brought about. That is one view. But there are equally strong view which says that, well, if media deviates from its objective, who is there to really keep a check on them? So two options are available, either self-regulation, that means media itself decides as to how to really set the guidelines and they are strictly followed. The other one is that you have an external regulator. The external regulator could be a government appointed one or even independent one. I mean, there are several models in the world where the government's, the sole work that the government does is only to recognize that kind of a regulator. Or it could be a government regulator. Today, there is no regulator in our country. Whatever regulation is there is being done by the ministry directly. So, what is a good thing to do? This is highly debatable. If people like you and us are willing to get together, come together and think together, I think we are capable in India to come out with a model which is unique in the world. We need not have a regulator in this conventional sense of the term, but we may also have a self-regulation which is far more accountable. I mean, I think accountability of the media is today to nobody. And unless that accountability element is brought into picture and that is brought into some kind of a reality, I mean, this debate will go on. The second point that people often discuss is media in the business for making money, or is people in media business for doing something other than making money? I think the case for self-regulation becomes considerably weak if it is established that people are there in the media business exclusively for making money. Then in that case, it cannot be distinguished from any other sector in the economy.
Yeah. And one last question, because the Honorable Secretary has to leave. Any questions? Any of you all? Okay. Can we give him a mic, please? And keep it very brief and succinct, to the point, please, sir.
First of all, I would like to thank Ministry of Information and Broadcasting for giving us a community radio license for our university. The first thing which I want to know, why, because you know, community radio is a medium which really caters a need of a variety of communities residing in a particular locality. But why ministry is restricting itself to allow community radio stations to broadcast news stories or news and current affairs kind of stories, when you are also planning to establish a certain number of FM radio stations in different cities which are having a population of almost 1 lakh. So why not to give a kind of liberty to community radio stations to broadcast news stories or informative stories on the radio stations? This is my question.
Well, there is no restriction on community radios talking about developmental stories. What we are restricting is political news. And there are very strong reasons why we are doing it. Even for FM, we have not allowed political news to be created by FM radios themselves. What we have allowed in phase 3 is the news which is offered to them by All India Radio. Very briefly, the reason is that in a country such diverse as ours, and knowing that it will be extremely difficult to really monitor the content of community radios, because there could be thousands of them, who is disseminating what kind of news, it becomes extremely difficult. Given the fact that we are still grappling with several issues which impinge upon national integration, on law and order, on communal harmony, I think it is perhaps a little prudent to go about it gradually and slowly. I am not saying that at no stage either FM radio or community radios will not be allowed news. What I am saying is that for the present, we thought it prudent to go like this. This whole thing would be reviewed. And once I think the media, the radio medium gets established, gets its credibility very well established, I see no reason why at some point of time in future, government will not consider allowing them to have news as part of their broadcasting. And that includes community radio as well.
Thank you very much, sir. Your insights on digitization and the promise, challenges, and prospects hold for the industry. Thank you very much. A big round of applause again. Thank you very much, sir.